So first, why breed cover crops? When the cover crop breeding network first started doing its work back in 2015, 2016, we carried out a survey of a little over 400 farmers and asked which traits they felt were important for each of the crops we planned on working on, so over winter cover crops. So the most commonly mentioned trait was nitrogen fixation, which we've investigated and found correlates quite highly with biomass accumulation. So biomass is a goal in and of itself, because in combination with early vigor, it helps with weed competition and all those soil health benefits that come from having a big mass of biomass to decompose. Winter hardiness is a big goal, obviously, because without that, we don't get any of those benefits of biomass in the spring. And we didn't ask on this survey, but we also know that breeding for seed yield can help bring seed costs down and make cover cropping a reasonable economic proposition for farmers. So in all of our crops, we're breeding for biomass, vigor, winter survival. We also have some crop-specific goals, and we'll talk specifically about cold tolerance and winter pea today. For the 3 legumes and rye, we start with breeding nurseries like these, where we can note and select single plants. So crimson clover, hairy vetch, and rye are outcrossing species. So nurseries start with 1,000 to 1,500 plants. We select 5 or 10% of those, and all the plants left in the nursery share pollen with one another, and we end up with one population coming out of that nursery. In contrast, winter pea is a self-thing crop, which means it doesn't naturally share pollen with its neighbors. So to create genetic diversity, we have to cross the pollen from one plant to the stigma right here, the sticky stigma, or the female reproductive part of another plant. So we start with segregating populations from this 2-plant cross and then select usually individuals to increase and advance to the next generation. So for these crops, once we select good-looking things in nurseries, the next step is advanced line trials in multiple locations nationwide. So these plots look a lot like the ones that you have on your farm, right? So there's a 15-foot row of the focus crop, in our case, winter peas, flanked by triticale. And we do this to simulate the competition that the legume would have in a mix. That legume grass mix is commonly used, and we know that survival is generally better with the protection and snow holding ability of the grass. So for the legumes in the cover crop breeding network, we have about 6 years of data, which has allowed us to make some pretty robust conclusions about how these lines do over space and time. This year, we're adding national cover crop variety trials, which are plot sized. So these are 4.5 foot wide plots by 20 feet with 5 varieties per species replicated across 12 sites. These are the iterations we have at Freeville, New York, our research farm here. And this allows a next size larger plot to compare the best of the best across time and place. So to sum up, there are 2 sides of our breeding process. We've got germplasm sourcing, germplasm development, then selection and breeding nurseries, then advanced line trials, the 15-foot rows that we run in several locations across the country. Then these larger plots. Concurrently, we have seed yield trials on smaller plots and then larger plots so that we can make sure that we weed out lines with poor seed yield or put more focus on lines with really promising seed yield. And then finally, we get to release and commercialization. You all come in right over here. So the on-farm trials are meant to supplement the knowledge we are gaining from our advanced line trials, which, because even if they're in a dozen locations across the country, that's only a dozen, and you guys are 69 locations. So that's a huge advantage to be able to look at a trait like winter survival which ultimately is a yes or no. There's a lot of nuance in there, but it gives us a lot more nuanced perspective on where and how these things survive. So our original goal, and still our goal with these trials, is to have you all trial cover crop breeding network experimental material. We had some issues with seed availability up until now, so we started this year with commercial material to get our methods down, etc. But starting this fall, we should be able to let you trial some CCB material. And I guess the good part is that if you find something you really like out of what you have, you can go and buy it for your farm. So this is an analysis based on 6 years of advanced line trial data. So you see the number of times each thing was trialed right here in the observations column. So we've got quite a bit of data. So, 25 different environments for this first entry here. We compare everything to the best check in our trials, which for us is Winter, for the balance of traits that we think are beneficial for cover cropping. So we see quite a bit of progress for fall vigor and spring vigor and biomass. So there are a lot of things that are better, that are as good or better for those 3 traits. Not a ton of progress in winter survival, although we have comparable winter survival to the best to Winter. Let's see. This is an index that I make to be able to balance, to weight the traits that are most important. I can say more about that if it's helpful. One last thing to say is that a couple of these with the stars we're hoping to make available for release. The top one, this was selected on Mark Douglas' farm, who was on the call with us today. So Mark, I would love to talk to you more if you're able to hang on about some details about that, because it's really shown excellent performance across time and space. So that's exciting to see that there is progress to be made. These are the lines, the 3 of the 4 lines you have in your trial. So Winter is our best check. It's been trialed in 5 seasons, so we've got a lot of data on it. Survivors also look really nice. It's a little more compact of a plant. It's a little later to flower, but it's done really nicely. We only have 2 years of data so far, so we know it's a good looking, pretty reliable variety. So we put that in there. Blaze, some of you have, is a semi-leafless variety. It doesn't put on as much biomass because of the type of pea it is. We'll talk more about that. But it has great winter survival. So we kind of put that in there for if there are places that Blaze survives that the others don't, we know that those are really key places to target for studying and selecting for winter survival. So this is where you come in. Your plots are small scale plots I think we have accommodated a lot of, I guess this is good for home gardens, for veg farmers who are growing on beds already, things like that. We have 69 participants, 43 of you have submitted results, which is honestly a pretty good ratio, about what we were hoping for, and will give us a really great baseline of data. We obviously are using the Seedlink platform, where you are collecting data on an app like this, and we have interactive results like this, which I'll share with you today. We've taken data once in the fall, we'll take it twice in the spring. And we have a rubric to make sure that each of us are generally having each number of the rating scale mean approximately the same thing. These are photos from Reed's farm, mapping the trial out, planting it, and having the seed in the ground. So this is what you all found for germination and emergence. Germination, I guess the trait is called germination in Seedlink. We're really measuring emergence. We're measuring what we can see coming out of the soil. We had 28 to 34 reviewers per variety, and everything was in the 3 to 5 range. So generally better than 75% emergence, which is pretty good. Blaze did a little more poorly, which is interesting. All of the lines tested at 93% germ or above before we sent them out. For fall vigor, same general trends. So everything was at least acceptable at a 3, with Canandaigua and Survivor moving towards strong growth. And part of this difference you're noticing owes to the leaf type. So there is a gene, there are 3 genes in pea that control leaf and tendril distribution and shape. Varieties like Blaze that are semi-leafless have 2 recessive copies of the Aphila gene. So they will put on tendrils where their terminal leaves would otherwise be. For grain production, this type is really beneficial. So these types stand up, kind of hold hands, and they are much easier to harvest. They don't lodge as much. So most of the grain peas produced now are these semi-leafless types. And like I said, we put Blaze in because of its exceptional winter hardiness, not necessarily because of its biomass, but I'm also really curious if any of you like that type better for manageability reasons or anything else. And the other 3 varieties are normal leafy types, so they are more indeterminate and vining, and they're the pea plants you might be more used to. Let's see, I see a few things in the chat. Let me just check that. Oh, hello, Glenn. Good to see you. Okay, the next thing we asked you to rate was flavor. So we coordinated with our friends at Blue Hill at Stone Barns to think about tasting peas, since peas are unique in that they can be both a functional cover crop and a tasty pea shoot or salad greens crop. We'll chat afterwards about how many of you evaluated flavor. Fewer people did. Like 15 to 19 reviews per variety we got for flavor. And generally we got in the range of I'd eat it again, but I wouldn't seek it out, to happily eat again for Survivor. When you look at the comments that some of you left, it's really all over the board. So there are a lot of environmental factors that can influence how or what flavor compounds come out in pea or in any crop. So for Survivor, across space this fall, we got everything from very bitter, overpowers any sweetness, to really good green pea flavor, to very sweet, very pleasurable. Get a similar assortment of ratings for texture. And yeah, that's just, I think one of my favorite things about studying flavor is that everyone's right. Like there's no objectively good or bad flavor. Different ones of us have different assortments of taste buds. We also have different experiences associated with foods. So the very same food can legitimately taste or have an overall experience more positive or negative, even if it's grown in the same place. And then you throw in the variables of where is it grown, how much moisture has it had, how much heat has it had, all these things. And yeah, the same variety can taste a lot of different ways. But it is interesting to see if we can find trends. So what are we talking about when we talk about winter hardiness? When in our advanced line trials, we talk about winter survival as just a ratio of the spring stand to the fall stand. So what percent of what came up in the fall was there in the spring? It's a bit of a blunt instrument, but it's it's pretty relevant, and it lets us it certainly lets us differentiate among varieties. Um, as all of you know, let me see. Oh, nice. Thanks, Reed, for the props to Miko. Um, Winter is complex, right? So it's not just temperature, it's also snow cover, wind, soil moisture, and then the uh, rate of change between different temperatures and snow cover and no snow cover, and certainly ice. Um, so it's more than just cold temperature. But when we talk about temperature specifically, acclimation is the process of the plant's biochemical adaptation to cold temperatures, and then deacclimation is the reversal of that process. So when we're thinking about things that we want to keep some cold hardiness when we have more temperature fluctuations. It gets really cold, but then we have some warm days, and it gets really cold again. So that's something that we are hoping to be able to select for just by selecting in the conditions of a changing climate. What makes a pea winter hardy? So there's a gene called the HR gene that confers high sensitivity to day length. So the pea stays in its vegetative stage where it's putting on leafy biomass, but not putting on flowers yet. And in the vegetative stage, it is less sensitive to cold. So by delaying flowering until those longer days in the spring, that gives it a critical mass of cold hardiness. Cold hardy peas also have a higher photosynthetic rate, and they accumulate more sugars, which you can taste. So it's finding peas with, first of all, that capacity to have that higher photosynthetic rate and to make more sugars, and then to have those functions upregulated when the temperatures drop. So there's variation in those things. Like, do we have the capacity genetically? And then does that capacity get dialed up at the right rate when temperatures get cold? Those, going back to probably high school chemistry that we did, when we put solutes in water, it will raise the boiling point and lower the freezing point. And it's lowering that freezing point that we're interested in here, and preventing the cell tissues from drying out, from the from losing that osmotic balance between different parts of the cell. Increases more more antioxidants are produced. Cell wall composition is changed slightly. It's a lot of detail. It's pretty complex, but that's in general what's happening. We know from our advanced science trials that there's kind of this sweet spot where we have we don't have complete winter death, we don't have complete winter survival, because neither of those scenarios tell us much or are much good for selection, because we can't tell which varieties are any worse or better than others. So that's where we've strategically placed on farm nurseries like the one at Mark's Place, and have gotten some really nice selections out of those environments. One of our collaborators in Minnesota is doing some growth chamber work. So subjecting pea plants to a cold acclimation, then a sub-zero acclimation, then a freeze drop, and then a recovery, and seeing how they do. So anywhere from not being damaged at all after that recovery to being completely dead. He's found that, okay, so this is a generation of selection here. So the F3 families and the next generation that he selected. So in the first generation, there were many families with complete death, or a high proportion of complete death, and very few families with no damage. And then in just a generation, he's got a lot more families that have no damage and fewer that have complete damage. And you can see in these scores, keeping in mind that lower is better, that he's moving the needle on freeze tolerance with this growth chamber procedure. We're doing some similar work here at Cornell. One of our grad students has a growth chamber or freeze chamber protocol of her own, seeking to both identify or refine previously identified genomic loci or QTL that have to do with cold tolerance in pea. And so those genetic loci would drive those biochemical mechanisms that I mentioned. So future opportunities, things that are happening, we're going to do on-farm trials with some CCB network varieties starting this fall. So would love to have as many of you as are able participate in that. And then Etienne, who may be still on the phone, is running some interesting on-farm evaluations of existing cover crops that you're going to plant anyway, and or a variety trial of commercial varieties that will correspond with our national cover crop variety trial. So watch this space, meaning the seedling feed and the emails that I send to you for more details on those things. I also would really love to do some on-farm breeding with some new material, some crosses that I've made, variable populations descending from those crosses, and have those selected in a lot of your locations. So that's still pending funding, but fingers crossed. And lastly, for those of you who are even remotely of our vicinity, we're going to have a cover crop and soil health field day on April 24th, which is a Thursday in the afternoon. You can see our breeding material in the field. The New York Soil Health Group will have their trailer there to do some demonstrations about cover crop, water infiltration, and all manner of things. We'll have various demos. Would really love to have you join us.
This is a production of Cornell University.